I want to start by a little story of a car manufacturer, Toyota. 2009, they had a problem. You may well recall this in the news, that they were starting to hear stories of cars which the accelerator stuck on and the brakes did nothing. There were stories of people who were sitting in their cars, petrified as the car shot off and they had no control over it. There was one famous occasion where a really tragic case where a man was in his car, he rang up the emergency services with the accelerator pedal stuck on and the brake was not working. Ultimately, the car crashed and plunged into a ravine and everyone in the car was killed. That call went viral and a scandal broke that so many cars by Toyota had this problem. And over the next 5 years, 90 people died in a Toyota as it mysteriously accelerated. As you can imagine, Toyota recalled millions of vehicles and had to eventually pay out in the courts. But imagine you're in your car and you're driving and the accelerator sticks on. What a nightmare to be in that situation. Can you imagine living life when the accelerator is stuck on? Life is just happening faster and faster, and you just can't seem to slow down. You get up in the morning, you get stuff ready, you go to work, you come home, you sort out stuff, repeat, get up in the morning, go through, and it just is on an accelerator, and you can't seem to stop. If you have a young family, maybe you recognize that literally for you there is no space in the day. Maybe the only sacred space is that moment when you're in the bathroom and in the bath. It's a wonderful story we used to read to our children. Maybe you've heard of it, called 5 Minutes Peace by Jill Murphy. And it's the bath that Mrs. Large in the story, the only place she gets is her 5 minutes peace in the bath. But then the children discover where she is and climb into the bath with her. And I remember Debbie literally had that with our children. They discovered her in the bath, off came their clothes, and they jumped in the bath as well. Now, often in some perverse ways, we fill our lives with being busy and we wear it with a badge of honor. And when you meet people, and you talk to people and you say, how are you? What's one of the main responses we get? Oh, life is so busy. So much going on. Oh, I don't know where I'm going to rest. It's just manic. And we say it as if it's a badge of honor. Thomas Merton, the writer, said this. He said, to allow oneself to be carried away by a multitude of conflicting concerns, to surrender to too many demands, to commit oneself to too many projects, to want to help everyone and everything is to succumb to the violence of our times. So with all this stress and pressure that many are feeling, what are our coping mechanisms? How do we deal with this? Well, the answer I find for many people is this. It's the holiday or the vacation window. I may be manic, it may be full on, but I've got this holiday I'm looking forward to. Life is full on, but I've booked this holiday in Rhodes or Turkey or in England in the rain. If you talk to any teachers, if you say, how are you? They'll say 3 weeks to go, 2 weeks to go. 1 week to go. And now I'm on holiday. And then the term starts again. How are you doing? Oh, 7 weeks to go. It's kind of like that repetition. So it's that work, vacation. Work, vacation. It's what the writer Peter Scazzero in his book Emotionally Healthy Living calls the secular rhythm. And many of us would recognize this rhythm that we have adopted from our culture. But I want to suggest there is an alternative rhythm. There is an alternative rhythm. A cure for maybe the busyness and maybe burnout that some of you feel. And even if you're in a stage of life, maybe you're retired, you can still have that sense of so much that is in your life. And that cure and alternative way of living is found in the ancient wisdom of the Sabbath. So what if, rather than work, rest? What if God has given you not a yearly rest or even a termly rest, but has designed you for a weekly rest? God's Sabbath rhythm. It's a reflection of the rhythm that undergirds all of creation. God has designed creation in a rhythm. So on a daily cycle, we have the light and the dark. We have sunrise, sunset. Tides come in, tides go out. So God's rhythm doesn't say that work is wrong. It says work is good, but it gives us boundaries within which we can better be the people God's created us to be, that rhythm of rest. So if you've been here through July, we've been looking at a series called Recover Your Life. Recover Your Life. And we've looked at kingdom simplicity. How do we live simply? We've looked at the unforced rhythms of grace, of discovering God's peace in our lives, that we are not alone. His Holy Spirit walks with us. And today, as we finish this series, I want to look at discovering God's design for your life, and that is rest. God's design for recovering your life, rest. And we're coming back to that foundational verse that we started with, which is a wonderful invitation by Jesus when he gives us this invitation, and Joe read it for us just a moment ago, where Jesus says, are you tired? Are you worn out? Are you burned out on religion? Come to me and get away with me, and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. So if we want to take a real rest, to learn from the master teacher Jesus, what will help me in the midst of the life that I am going through, whether you feel rushed at the moment or whether or not you just don't seem to have a good rhythm in your life? And as we look to find ways to do that, top of the list to help us is Sabbath. It's Sabbath. We were designed to live in God's image. And you know, in Scripture, when you read about God, even God has a place and a time for rest. You go back to the beginning when God created the world. He created those 6 days he worked, and then in verse 2 of chapter 2 in Genesis, by the seventh day, God had finished the work he'd been doing. So on the seventh day, he rested from all his work. Then God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. Did you catch that? Even God rested. Even God rested. And then what he tells Moses is to command the people of Israel, and for us in this commandment, he says in Deuteronomy, observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy, as the Lord your God has commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. So I want to encourage you, wherever you are, that maybe you recognize, yes, I've heard about Sabbath and I know all about that and I'm trying to live it out. From those of us who've maybe heard about what it is but have not taken anything seriously to put into place a rhythm of life that will help you in the way God's designed you to be, because we are made in his image. A number of years ago at New Wine, which again is happening this week, there was a speaker called John Mark Comer. And in that week, he outlined what it was to live a restful life. And he outlined how a good Sabbath can be lived. And I know many in the life of the church, they changed the way they live through hearing that talk and reading a wonderful book that I would really recommend to you by John Mark Comer called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. It's a great title, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. And we have a number of copies of these on the bookstall to take away maybe on holiday with you. So we recognize that having a rhythm that God has for us is something which is so important. And we need it, and we need to put it in practice. But why do we need it? Why do we need it? And I want to just share a few things of why we need a Sabbath. Firstly, Sabbath is a reminder of the big story. It's a reminder of the big story. As Rick Warren started a great book, he said, it's not about you. It's not about you. In the Sabbath, we step back and realize we're part of a big story in the cosmos. We're tiny in comparison to an amazing God. It's about him and remembering that he is in charge. Sabbath says, I am not the one keeping the world going. And we need regular rhythms to remind us of the greatness of God. Otherwise, we just get everything out of kilter. And you see, Sabbath is more than just having a day off. It's different to a day off. Eugene Peterson says, when you have Sabbath just as a day off, it's a bastard Sabbath, if you can use that word. It's not good enough. I was talking to somebody in the church recently who said they'd heard all about Sabbath and in the past always thought it was just about having a day off. But in the last few months had begun to really take it seriously and say, I'm going to try and put in place what a Sabbath should be. And when they reflected on that, it felt completely different. It wasn't just that day off, but it was a real delight to slow down. And that word delight is a wonderful word because Sabbath can be translated is to delight. To delight. To delight in our world, to delight in our lives in it, but primarily to delight in God. So the question is, what can I do for 24 hours that would fill my soul with deep joy and bring delight? What would it be for you? We're all quite different. What would it be to have 24 hours of deep joy and delight that you were able to focus on? The writer Dan Allender, in a book called Sabbath, he said this. He said, the Sabbath is an invitation to enter delight. The Sabbath, when experienced as God intended, is the best day of our lives. Without question or thought, it's the best day of the week. It's the day we anticipate on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, and the day we remember on Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. Sabbath is the holy time when we feast, play, dance, have sex, sing, pray, laugh, tell stories, read, paint, walk, and watch creation in all its fullness. Few people are willing to enter the Sabbath and sanctify it, to make it holy, because a day full of delight and joy is more than just people can bear in a lifetime, let alone in a week. I think it's a wonderful way of putting it. But saying Sabbath is a reminder of the big story. Secondly, Sabbath is a day to stop. It's a day to stop. Shabbat, Sabbath, literally means to cease, to stop. So on the Sabbath, we embrace our limits because we often have an illusion that we are indispensable to the running of the world around us. That if we stop, everything around us will stop. But we need to recognize that we will never finish all of our goals. That God is on the throne, managing to run the universe quite well without us. So for many of us, we don't recognize our limits. We don't broadcast, actually, we're not very good at some things. We broadcast the things we do well, but not the things we don't do quite so well. We have limits, all of us. So we stop. So Debbie and I, over the last few years, we're on a journey with Sabbath, trying to learn how we go. But our day off is a Friday, so that's our Sabbath. So Thursday night, we have a meal. Try and remember to light a candle. And that candle is inviting God's presence into the next 24 hours. It's where we don't do any more emails. Try to not answer the phone. Where we don't talk about work. Where we just recognize this is the start of a different feel to the next 24 hours. And we invite God into that space. So it's a reminder that we are part of a bigger picture and a story. It's the chance to stop. And thirdly, and very practically, Sabbath has no to-do lists. Sabbath has no to-do lists. Now, I know that some of you probably are to-do list junkies. You love having a list for everything and anything. I love a good to-do list. It feels so fulfilling to tick off and to look back and think all the things that you've done that day. Now, I know for some of you, today, you've got a to-do list. You're thinking, I've got to get to Lidl in a minute. I've got to get the things ready for tomorrow. If I'm going to New Wine, I've got to pack. And you're saying, Simon, get a move on. Get a move on. Hurry up, preacher boy. I've got things to do. I've got to tick off my list. And we have those lists you have. if having a no to-do list for you is petrifying, it can probably feel like driving a car without a steering wheel. You don't know quite how you're going to survive. But I would encourage you to give it a go. On a Sabbath, no to-do list. See how it goes. Put it into practice. From his book, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, John Mark Comer says this. He says, "The Sabbath is a day when I don't accomplish anything and I don't feel guilty. It's a day where I don't have to get more. It's a day where I enjoy what I already have. No to-do list, no accomplishment, no phone, no tech, no shopping, literally a weekly recalibration. Think of Sabbath like a weekly holiday." So get rid of that to-do list on the Sabbath. And fourthly, Sabbath is a declaration of freedom. It's a declaration of freedom. In that first reading in Deuteronomy, what God is getting the people of his people to remember is their time in Egypt. And here's what he said. He said, "Observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy, as the Lord your God has commanded you. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and that the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm." So how many days do you think you get off as a slave? No. You don't get days off as a slave. And what God is saying is to remember that culture you were part of, you were forced to work 24/7. And when we say no to constant working, always on the go, when we take a Sabbath and a rest in our culture, we're making a declaration of freedom. Tim Keller puts it brilliantly. He says that God portrays the Sabbath day as a reenactment of emancipation from slavery. It reminds us how he delivered his people from a condition in which they were not human beings, but simply units of capacity in Pharaoh's brick production system. Anyone who cannot obey God's command to observe the Sabbath is a slave, even a self-imposed one. Sabbath is therefore a declaration of our freedom. It means you're not a slave, not to your culture's expectations, your family's hopes, your medical school's demands, not even to your own insecurities. We declare enough stuff, enough activities, enough earning. We don't have to prove anything. We don't have to have perfect kids. This is a chance to stop. In Jesus, I am free. I don't have to sign my kids up to every activity under the sun. Keeping Sabbath is a wonderful declaration of freedom. And then lastly, Sabbath is a personal invitation from Jesus. It's a personal invitation from Jesus. Will you get away with me? Will you take a real rest? Will you learn the unforced rhythms of grace? And there's actually a paradox around Sabbath, because you have to be intentional and you have to get ready for it, because Sabbath just doesn't happen. If you want a Sabbath rest, you need to prepare for it. You need to make the effort to create the space. And as I'm speaking, I can imagine some of you already thinking, "Simon, do you know my life? Do you know the young family I've got, or the demands I've got, the people I'm caring for, the things that are going on, my social life, all that stuff? How am I supposed to fit this into my life in real and practical ways?" Get real, get concrete for a moment. How do we do that? Well, to help us think, and for you to think about, how do I put this into my own personal life? Maybe you've got, for instance, let's think of the most stressful time in early family. How with young families do you do this? Well, I came across and heard of a young family who used to be part of St. Andrews. Now they've moved elsewhere. They've got a young family, and they've been doing some thinking about what it means to have a rhythm of rest and a rhythm of Sabbath. So I thought I'd invite them to share something of that for the next few minutes. Let's just watch this little video clip.
So what does a pattern of rest look like for us? What does that look like for us?
Well, I'd say that it's something that we're very much on a journey with.
Yeah.
So particularly even as we've entered this new year, this is a journey that's started for us. And I think for me, I've thought about it in a few ways. What does a pattern of rest look for us like daily? So daily, that looks like establishing rhythms. We have a little girl, so establishing rhythms on a morning where we both get time that we know is ours to spend with Jesus. It looks like trying to make the times that can be chaotic around family life, put rhythms and routines even in place that help us have rest within them. It looks like weekly establishing Sabbath. That's something we're really trying to work out. What does that look like for us at the moment? What does that look like to put a weekly Sabbath in that is both restful and a real highlight for us in our week that we can look forward to as a family? And yearly too, what does that look like in terms of time together as a family, having habits, things that are established that we come to, that again is that benchmark point that A is really restful, but B, we really look forward to and become something of a rhythm and routine that is exciting and grounding who we are as a family.
And I think as well, it brings our faith as a family extra to that, doesn't it? It brings so much more. It's not just rest for the sake of rest. It's resting because there's a depth to it. And something that we've gone on recently, haven't we? We've started asking ourselves is, what does it look like when we're saying yes to something, or what are we saying no to as well? And when we're saying no to something, what are we saying yes to? So I say yes to a trustee meeting, but I'm saying no to is an evening spent with you. And if there's 3 of them in 1 week, then actually we're asking, when we're saying no to things, we're saying yes to family, or we're saying yes to resting, or we're saying yes to stepping into something that we want to. And so that's been a really interesting conversation for us.
Yeah, and I think, thinking about how that affects our relationship with God, how does that build our faith? I think when we come from a more, I think it's God's design for us actually, first and foremost. I think the crazed, fast-paced living, I'm not sure that that's what God had planned. I think that's very 21st century, isn't it? It's something which we want to speed life up as much as we can, efficiency and getting done the most we can, really. So living from a place of rest for me affects the way that I am towards others. It affects how loving and patient and kind to be to just even you guys, to my family, but also in a more widespread way to those that I'm dealing with every day, to those that I come across, the young people that I work with. I can be a more loving, more Jesus-centered version of who God's made me to be.
So it's interesting to hear those who've maybe given some thought to what are we trying to do. So I want to encourage you maybe. What can you do that's going to put this theory into practice? Some of you may be really good at this. Some of you already may have practices for you. Others, I've just got 7 days and they're all the same. I've got no Sabbath living at all. So what can we put into place? And the first thing to recognize is that you don't compare yourself with others. In Jesus' day and in the early church, they had some people who would look at others and they compare. And the Bible actually says this in Colossians. It says, don't let anyone pass judgment on how you use Sabbath. So you need to use Sabbath in the way that's going to help you grow in your faith with God, have rest, and find that place that will help you to thrive in that rhythm. So 3 very simple things as takeaways for you to put into practice. 1, get away. I don't mean literally get away physically to another place, but get away away from machines, away from noises, away from voices. Just get away. Not I'll get away from Facebook and just use Instagram, but disconnect from the stuff that are trying to get our time. Sabbath is a great time to disconnect. So get away. Secondly, get quiet. Get quiet. Again, that disconnection from stuff around us and the noise that's happening around us from news and emails and all that other stuff. Just get quiet. One of the things which might be a helpful thing for you, which is quite useful, I find, is a journal, which is something called paper and a pen. Remember those? Not on your iPad and not on your phone because they're all distractions, but just simply to slow down and to write, to get quiet. Maybe the things that are concerning you, the things that maybe God is even speaking to you, just to get it out there and to slow down, to begin to write down some things. So get away, get quiet. And thirdly, maybe surprisingly, get together. It doesn't mean it has to be Sabbath is done in isolation. It can be, but sometimes it's good to get together with others, which can be over a meal, having a meal with others. And I don't mean spending hours having a great big dinner party, but simple. Buy an Asda pizza, invite people around, no plates to wash up, and just enjoy being with others. Getting that regular, repeated rhythm in your life. Get away, get quiet, and get together. So just imagine what St. Andrew's people might be like if we were in that place of working from rest, of being the people God's created us to be, in that simple rhythm of life. Because Sabbath is about Jesus, being with Jesus. So I'm going to invite us as we come to the end of our service just to stand with me. Would you stand for a moment? If I can invite the band as well to make their way up, that would be great.